This morning, the pending strike from Irma, the heavy toll left by Hurricane Harvey, weighing over Capitol Hill, where the president is one chamber away from getting the first major deal of his administration. Today, the House votes on a plan that guarantees nearly $8 million in Hurricane Harvey aid, raises the debt ceiling, and continues the budget for the next 3 months. It's easily cleared the Senate yesterday with 17 votes against, all from Republicans.
What we're doing in this body today is not draining the swamp. What we're doing is running a whole bunch of hoses to the edge of the swamp, turning them on to the highest possible volume flow, and then turning our backs on the swamp and shouting, "There's nothing to see here." That's what we're doing. We're doing the opposite of draining the swamp today. Do your constituents know that Chuck Schumer, whose title is Minority Leader, not Majority Leader, just made himself the most powerful man in America for the month of December? Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi now have most of the cards for when we get to December. This is an embarrassing moment for a Republican-controlled Congress and a Republican administration.
Well, I was a little surprised, quite frankly. I think we negotiated against ourselves. Now, the debt ceiling doesn't give the markets sort of the long-term certainty we need, and the Democrats have us in a box in terms of the end of the year. Other than that, it was a pretty good deal.
Did the president sort of sell out his own party here?
I think he did what he thought was right, and he didn't talk to a lot of people.
Still, the president savored the deal, Politico reporting that he was upbeat as he phoned the House and Senate leaders on both sides. Quote, in calls with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi Thursday morning, Trump raved about the positive news coverage it had received, according to people familiar with the calls. And he seemed very pleased with his decision. Trump specifically mentioned TV segments praising the deal and indicated he'd been watching in a call with Schumer. And later in the day, during a meeting, the president referred to the Democratic leaders by name as he looked ahead to a new chapter of bipartisanship.
We had a great meeting yesterday with Nancy Pelosi and Senator Schumer, and it was a very bipartisan meeting. We could have done a longer deal, but that would have affected the military, as you know, so we really kept it for 3 months because of the military. We have a great respect for the sanctity of the debt ceiling, and Chuck does, and Nancy does, and we all do. I thought it was a very, very friendly, it was a meeting that we all wanted to get together and do something, and I think the primary reason was because you look at North Korea, you look at the hurricanes, you look at what's going on in the Middle East, and I said, frankly, it's time that we walk out and shake hands and have a deal. And they agreed, and I will tell you, it was there was a lot of spirit in that room, a lot of good spirit.
Yeah, and Willie, this is something that we talked about yesterday. You look at what's happening with North Korea, you look at what's happening with Irma, you look at what's happened, of course, out in Texas, you look at the debt ceiling fight, you look at all the other things that are lined up in front of this Congress and this president. I'd say getting a couple of things out of the inbox is pretty necessary moving forward. I do agree with Ben Sass. It is embarrassing for the Republican Congress, but this is a Republican Congress that had been promising to repeal Obamacare for 7 years, and neither chamber had the votes at the end to do a deal that both could agree on. So at that point, what do you do but actually find the vote somewhere if you want to make things happen in Washington?
I think that's exactly the right point, Joe. The people I talked to yesterday said the President of the United States was so frustrated and so annoyed and so angry that a Republican-controlled Congress couldn't get through its signature promise during the campaign and his signature promise during the campaign to repeal and replace Obamacare, that he said, if you can't get that done, I'm going to go another way. By the way, as we were watching the president speak here, we wanted a thought bubble over Mike Pence's head.
Oh, that
as Trump talked about Chuck and Nancy, his new buddies. But I understand why Republicans are upset about this, Joe. I understand why they feel left out of the process.
Right.
I understand why they feel like Democrats have all the leverage in December. But for all the people in Washington and all the people like us on TV who have lamented the days of Tip and Ronald getting together in bipartisanship to get a deal done, that's what happened a couple of days ago. The Democrats got together with the Republican president to get something done to help people in Texas.
And it seems like ideologues on both sides didn't get that. Even liberals who have been saying we need to get both sides together. We don't need the government to shut down. We don't need the debt ceiling. This, that, that. It's almost like this happened, and a lot of people didn't know what to do with themselves because everybody's gone to their corners for so long that when you actually have a Republican president and Democratic leaders talking together, it still doesn't register. But I'll say it again. For Americans who are like running to pick up their kids from school and then running home and then running back to work, and they just hear on the news, Republican president got together with Democratic leaders to make sure that America doesn't default on its debt. Inside news, Republicans are mad. They just go, turn off the radio, and they'll go, we're glad Washington's finally working.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what Donald Trump thought as he read the newspapers yesterday morning, as he talked to Chuck and Nancy yesterday. He said, did you see the coverage we're getting? We struck a deal. I reached across the aisle, it said on the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times. So the question to you two guys, Mark and John, is whether this deal is a sign of more collaboration between Trump and the Democrats. Case in point, many surprised by the president tweeting yesterday morning, for all of those DACA that are concerned about your status during the 6-month period, you have nothing to worry about. No action, exclamation point. Well, apparently during the morning call yesterday between the president and the House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, Pelosi asked the president to reassure the children of undocumented immigrants, and he did with that tweet.
He called this morning. I said, thanks for calling. This is what we need. People really need a reassurance from you, Mr. President, that the 6-month period is not a period of roundup. I was reporting to my colleagues. I said, this is what I asked the president to do, and boom, 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 the tweet appeared. So that was good.
Boom, boom. Also yesterday, President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer reportedly have agreed to pursue a deal that would permanently remove the requirement that Congress repeatedly raise the debt ceiling. The Washington Post, citing 3 people familiar with that decision, reports the idea was discussed at their Oval Office meeting on Wednesday. Trump and Schumer, along with House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, reportedly agreed to work together in the coming months to finalize a plan. The White House said Trump has encouraged congressional leaders to find a more permanent solution. Mark Halperin, that's obviously a very unpopular idea to conservative Republicans. They want to have to raise the debt ceiling to control spending.
Let's talk about this idea about the president liking the coverage. One thing we know about the president, he likes good coverage.
Who doesn't?
This will get good coverage if he works with Democrats for as far as the eye can see. It'll produce more liberal policies, which a lot of people in the media like. It produces a change in the storyline, which a lot of people like. The establishment media likes bipartisanship over ideology. It could go on for a good long time. He will get good coverage the more he works with them. And the press, while the press likes covering failure, we're kind of sick of covering failure, getting stuff done. So I think that through Halloween, if the president works with Democrats and maybe beyond, he can get positive coverage and he'll respond positively to that. And Republicans are going to have to figure out how to deal with that because they can't stop him from working with the Democrats. It's easy for him now to work with them. Yeah.
Well, Joe, doesn't it also, isn't part of the story here the Republicans' inability to be true to who they are, each of them as leaders? I mean, it's almost like they've neutered themselves. They really, truly never said anything when the president did reprehensible things. They could barely speak out. They could barely utter his name. These Democrats, they have named it every step of the way. But you know what? When there was a deal to be made, when there was good coverage, guess who was there? Donald Trump. This is not easy to figure out, and they have sat there silent. Paul Ryan has sat there just debasing himself, literally letting himself get insulted left and right, and then he sits next to the president and he's mute. And then he gets screwed over, to be horrific in terms, but that's the bottom line, is they've had no voice every step of the way, and now they're sitting here just totally confused as to what happened because they've never had one. They need to say it when it's wrong. When Charlottesville happens, they need to say it. When the president is a bigot, they need to say it. They're not going to lose their jobs. They're going to gain respect. And they'll still be able to cut a deal with the president because that's how he works. He likes good coverage. Isn't that part of it here?
Well, I agree with everything that you said, that they should stand up, and they should have stood up after Charlottesville and all these other times that you're talking about. But at the end of the day, it's not about his tweets. It's not about insults. It's not about this bizarre statement or that bizarre action. It's about Republicans being able to deliver the votes they said they were going to be able to deliver. And John Heilman, Mark was talking about how the president likes good coverage and almost making getting things done sound dirty, when actually what happened yesterday, ideology aside, is that Washington worked for the first time in a very long time. Republican leaders and Democratic leaders came together on a topic that many people said was going to be difficult to solve. They got in the same room and they solved it. And the president likes good coverage. Well, okay, well, whether he likes good coverage or not, more importantly, Americans like seeing their government work. I understand why conservatives are upset, but yes, this probably will happen again because nothing succeeds like success.
Right. I mean, I agree with 87% of what you just said. I take exception with 13%, just in the sense that I don't think Republican leaders and Democratic leaders got together in a room, although they got together in a room. The reality is that Donald Trump, who's not a Republican, got together in a room with Republican leaders and Democratic leaders.
In a form of theater.
And then in a form of theater, and then decided to make the deal for the reasons we've all described here. I don't think there's anything bad about it. I don't think there's anything dirty about it. I think you're right. The American people are going to like to see something getting done. There's no question about that. But this is a situation where Republican leaders here got exactly the kind of poetic justice they deserved. They have made a deal with the devil, with Donald Trump, in this sense. And I'm not calling him a devil, but I am saying they made this deal of convenience. They said, we know you're not really a conservative. We know you're not really a Republican, but we think we can use you, Donald Trump, as a vehicle for our policy agenda. Well, the reality is Donald Trump yesterday for the first time, or 2 days ago for the first time, said, I'm doing the same thing with you guys. You're right, I'm not a Republican. I'm not really committed to the party whatsoever. And you guys can't be a vehicle for what I want to get done. I'll find another vehicle. This is all a marriage of convenience on both sides. And to your point, Joe, if Republicans can't get Donald Trump some votes, he's going to go try to find the votes somewhere else. The last thing I'll say, though, is that I just don't think there are a lot of issues where those votes are going to be available, because Democrats, these Democratic leaders, they can make these deals on these kinds of things with Donald Trump. But the Democratic base will not allow Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to give Donald Trump a lot of victories on more controversial things.
Well, Casey, we have DACA coming up. That would be a victory for the Democrats, also for Donald Trump, also for 80% of the American people who don't want the Dreamers deported. If you have a deal, which I would personally hate, that would end this debt ceiling requirement to vote. That's something, though, I think that most Americans would prefer as well. And
yeah.
I mean, Republicans have to be scratching their heads going, okay, what do we do next? And I just wonder, is it going to get the members of the Freedom Caucus in the House and the moderate Republicans in the Senate to figure out how to talk to each other to decide whether they pass the legislation or whether Donald Trump has to get Democratic votes? As I've been saying for 8 months now, he's going to have to get Democratic votes, because you can't campaign, you can't work with just 33% of the country supporting you. Will they get it? Will Republicans be able to agree with Republicans that either we figure out how to get a majority for these things, or we turn the House floor and the Senate floor over to Democrats?
I mean, Joe, look, I think it's beginning to look as though Republican leaders Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell have made a fundamental miscalculation here. I mean, they have essentially, yes, they made that so-called deal with the devil, to use John Heilman's words for this. But, behind the scenes, they've basically felt like they haven't taken the president seriously. They have sat back and said, look, okay, fine, you can have the Oval Office, but we're going to sit here and run the country. And the reality is they failed to deliver on that because they couldn't bridge those divisions that you just mentioned. And I see no sign that those divisions are going to get any better. They seem to be getting worse. The Freedom Caucus now talking about replacing the House Speaker. Steve Bannon out criticizing Mitch McConnell and pushing on those people from the right. I think that this points to a potential pattern here with Democrats. And I really do think, look, there's been a ton of chaos. This presidency has been way different from any we've ever seen. But this is the first move that Donald Trump has really made that has shaken up the way that the country is governed legislatively. This is the first story I've covered where something completely unpredictable has actually happened on the floors of the House and the Senate with this deal that this so-called Republican president has made with Democrats. So, look, I think for the president, if he wants to keep down this road, all bets are off. And the predictions we're making, who knows what may be right down the line.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.